Nobody talks about the casseroles that fed African American families through the hardest decades of the 20th century. These weren't trendy one dish meals, they were survival, creativity, and love layered into heavy pans and baked until golden. Here are 30 African American casseroles no one makes anymore. Sweet potato and sausage casserole filled African American kitchens with the scent of caramelized sugar and smoky pork. Thick rounds of sweet potato were layered with sliced smoked sausage, seasoned with cinnamon, brown sugar, and a touch of cayenne. The dish was covered and baked until the potatoes softened and the sausage released its fat into the layers below. The result was a sticky, savory, sweet combination that balanced richness with earthiness. Families valued it because both ingredients were affordable and filling, stretching easily across a crowded table. It appeared at suppers and church potlucks, carried in foil-covered dishes by women who cooked from memory. Children loved the sweetness, while adults appreciated its staying power. Sweet potato and sausage casserole carried warmth, thrift, and tradition in every golden layer. Cornbread and collard green bake brought two pillars of Southern black cooking into one resourceful dish. Leftover collards, already simmered with seasoning and pork, were spread into a greased pan. Cornbread batter was poured on top, sealing in the potlikker and smoky flavor beneath. As it baked, the cornbread soaked up the juices, becoming moist and seasoned on the bottom while staying crisp on top. It stretched two staples into a complete meal without needing anything else on the plate. Families relied on it during lean weeks when using what was already cooked saved time and money. The flavors were earthy, smoky, and comforting, a reminder of the ingenuity that defined African American kitchens. This bake was never in cookbooks, but it lived in the hands of cooks who knew leftovers could become something memorable. Chitlin casserole carried both controversy and pride into the same kitchen. Cleaned and boiled chitlins were chopped, layered with onions, seasoning, and sometimes cheese or cream sauce, then baked until bubbly and browned. The aroma was unmistakable and filled the house long before the dish was ready. For families who prepared chitlins during the holidays, turning them into a casserole reinvented tradition without abandoning it. The baking softened the texture and mellowed the flavor, making it more approachable for younger eaters who resisted the boiled version. It appeared on holiday tables and special occasion spreads, always made by someone who earned the right through years of practice. Chitlin casserole was polarizing, but for those who loved it, nothing else carried the same weight of heritage and memory baked into one dish. Ham hock and lima bean bake turned two humble ingredients into something deeply satisfying. Smoked ham hocks were simmered until tender, the meat pulled and mixed with cooked lima beans, onions, garlic, and thick broth. The mixture was poured into a baking dish, topped with breadcrumbs, and baked until the edges crisped and the center bubbled. The smokiness soaked into every bean, creating a rich casserole that needed nothing beside it. Families made it when budgets were tight, knowing a single ham hock could stretch across an entire pan. It honored the tradition of using every part of the animal and wasting nothing. Children scraped their plates clean without being told, and adults quietly served themselves seconds. Ham hock and lima bean bake was comfort built from scraps and made whole by care. Oxtail and rice casserole was a Sunday dish that demanded patience and rewarded it with extraordinary flavor. Oxtails were braised low and slow with garlic, onions, thyme, and tomato paste until the meat fell from the bone and the marrow dissolved into velvety sauce. The braised meat was layered with seasoned rice in a deep dish, covered tightly and baked until the rice absorbed the rich broth. Every grain carried the deep, beefy flavor of the oxtails, making the dish feel far more luxurious than its cost. It was reserved for occasions when time allowed slow cooking and the house could fill with its aroma for hours. Families passed it around with reverence, knowing the effort behind it. Oxtail and rice casserole was proof that patience and humble cuts could produce something unforgettable. Candied yam casserole held a place of honor at every holiday table, its sticky sweetness impossible to resist. Thick slices of sweet potato were layered with brown sugar, butter, cinnamon, and nutmeg, then baked until the syrup thickened and the edges caramelized. Some cooks added orange juice or vanilla to brighten the flavor, while others kept it simple. The dish was assembled hours before dinner, filling the kitchen with warm fragrance long before the first plate was served. It straddled the line between side dish and dessert, touching everything on the plate and making it sweeter. Children reached for it first, and elders smiled, knowing the recipe had stayed the same for decades. Candied yam casserole carried memory in every bite, a golden reminder of family tables and traditions that sweetened even the hardest years. Smothered chicken and rice bake was a one-pan miracle that turned a few pieces of chicken into dinner for the whole family. Seasoned chicken was browned, then laid over rice in a deep dish. Onions, garlic, and bell peppers were sautéed in the drippings and poured over the top with broth, creating gravy that cooked the rice as the casserole baked. The chicken became fall-apart tender, while the rice absorbed every drop of seasoned liquid beneath it. Families loved it because it required one pan and turned inexpensive ingredients into something rich and complete. It was a weeknight supper that felt like Sunday, hearty enough to silence a table of hungry children. Smothered chicken and rice bake reflected the genius of cooks who understood that patience and seasoning could transform the ordinary into something no one would forget. Black-eyed pea casserole carried both nourishment and symbolism into African American homes. Cooked peas were mixed with sautéed onions, garlic, diced tomatoes, and sometimes ground meat or smoked turkey, then poured into a baking dish and topped with cornbread, batter, or cheese. As it baked, the topping browned while the filling thickened into a savory base. The dish was popular around New Year's Day, when black-eyed peas symbolized luck and prosperity, but it appeared on weeknight tables too, whenever dried beans and cornmeal were the most affordable options in the pantry. Families valued its heartiness and simplicity, knowing it could feed a crowd without extra expense. Black-eyed pea casserole was both cultural tradition and practical solution, carrying the resourcefulness that defined generations of African American cooking. Neckbone and potato bake was the kind of casserole that could warm a household with its aroma alone. Smoked neckbones were simmered until tender, their rich broth reserved for the baking dish. The meat was pulled and layered with sliced potatoes, onions, garlic, and seasoning, then covered with broth and baked until the potatoes turned soft and golden at the edges. The smoky flavor seeped into every layer, making each forkful deeply satisfying. This was a weekday casserole made from ingredients that cost little but delivered immense comfort. Families who grew up during the mid-20th century knew neckbones as a dependable source of flavor when budgets were thin. Children came to the table without being called, drawn by the smell. Neckbone and potato bake was cooking where nothing was wasted and everything mattered. Catfish and cornbread casserole brought the flavors of a southern fish fry into one baking dish. Fried or baked catfish fillets were broken into chunks and layered with crumbled cornbread, sautéed onions, celery, and a seasoned egg and broth mixture that held everything together. It was baked until the top turned golden and crisp while the inside stayed moist and flavorful. This was a clever way to stretch a small catch into a full meal, feeding more mouths than a simple fry could manage. Families near rivers and creeks made it regularly, turning the day's catch into something communal. The combination of flaky fish and savory cornbread created comfort that felt distinctly Southern and rooted in tradition. Catfish and cornbread casserole was practical, affordable, and beloved, honoring both the water and the kitchen with equal respect. Pig feet and white bean bake honored the tradition of using every part of the hog. Pig feet were boiled for hours until the skin turned gelatinous and the meat softened enough to pull from the bone. The shredded meat was folded into cooked white beans with onions, garlic, and vinegar, then baked until the top formed a golden crust. The gelatin thickened the broth naturally, giving the casserole a rich body that no flour could match. Families made this during colder months when preserved pork was plentiful and beans were a pantry constant. It was filling, affordable, and stretched easily across the table. The dish carried cultural weight, reminding eaters of a time when nothing edible was discarded. Pig feet and white bean bake was thrift-made delicious, a casserole that turned the overlooked into the unforgettable. Cabbage and smoked turkey casserole brought two affordable staples together into something greater than either alone. Shredded cabbage was layered with smoked turkey wings or necks, onions, garlic, and seasoning in a deep dish. Broth was poured over the layers before it was covered and baked until the cabbage wilted and absorbed the smoky essence of the turkey. The result was tender, flavorful, and deeply comforting. Families turned to this casserole as a lighter alternative to pork-heavy dishes without sacrificing richness. It was a weeknight meal that required little effort but delivered big flavor. Cabbage was inexpensive and available year-round, while smoked turkey added protein and depth. This dish reflected the quiet evolution of African American cooking, holding on to tradition while adapting without losing the soul of the food. Okra and tomato bake was a casserole rooted in the agricultural traditions of the Deep South and West Africa. Fresh okra was sliced and layered with stewed tomatoes, onions, and garlic in a buttered baking dish. A topping of breadcrumbs or cornmeal gave it a golden crust when baked. The tomatoes broke down during cooking, creating a tangy sauce that balanced the earthy flavor of the okra. Families who grew their own gardens relied on this dish during summer when both crops were abundant. It was simple, nutritious, and required nothing expensive. Served as a side or eaten as a full meal with cornbread, it carried the flavors of harvest season into the kitchen. Okra and tomato bake connected African American tables to ancestral foodways, a pairing that traveled across oceans and survived centuries of change. Beef shank stew transformed one of the toughest, cheapest cuts into something that rivaled expensive roasts in flavor and tenderness. The shanks were cross-cut to expose the marrow, then browned deeply before being covered with water or stock. Hours of gentle simmering broke down tough connective tissue into gelatin, creating a broth so rich it set solid when chilled. Onions, carrots, celery, and potatoes joined the pot, soaking up that beefy essence. The marrow was considered the prize, spread on bread or stirred into the stew for extra richness. This was Sunday dinner food, started in the morning and ready by evening. Families gathered, knowing the wait had been worth it, each bite tender and deeply satisfying. Beef shank stew proved patience could transform humble cuts into something special. Beef tripe stew was not for the faint of heart, but those who grew up eating it remember the dish with deep affection. Tripe required thorough cleaning and long cooking to become tender, but the result was worth every minute of preparation. The honeycomb texture held onto flavorful broth, making each bite an experience. Black cooks prepared it with tomatoes, onions, garlic, and plenty of pepper, creating a stew with Caribbean and Southern influences intertwined. Some versions included potatoes or hominy to stretch the meal. The dish was considered special occasion food despite its humble origins, served when the family wanted something different. The smell was distinctive, earthy, and rich, announcing to the neighborhood that serious cooking was happening. Tripe stew taught children that texture and flavor mattered more than appearance. Black-eyed pea stew carried cultural significance beyond its role as winter fare. It was luck food, traditionally eaten on New Year's Day, but enjoyed through cold months. The peas were simmered with smoked meat, usually ham hocks or salt pork, until they became creamy and the broth turned rich with smoky depth. Onions, garlic, and tomatoes joined the pot, adding layers of flavor that made each spoonful interesting. Some cooks added collard greens directly to the stew, creating a complete meal that symbolized prosperity. The peas provided protein and fiber, while smoked meat added fat and flavor that satisfied deep hunger. Children ate this stew, knowing the stories behind it, that peas represented coins and greens represented paper money. This was tradition passed down through generations, connecting families to heritage through every bowl. Chitterling and cheese casserole took one of the most traditional soul food ingredients and gave it new form. Cleaned and boiled chitterlings were chopped, mixed with cheese sauce made from butter, flour, milk, and sharp cheddar, then baked until golden and bubbly. The cheese mellowed the strong flavor, making the dish approachable while carrying the unmistakable taste that defined it. Families often prepared this for holiday gatherings, where it sat alongside greens, cornbread, and sweet potatoes. It kept tradition alive while offering something even skeptical younger eaters might try. The combination of creamy cheese and tender chitterlings created a richness that was bold and comforting. This casserole has largely vanished from modern tables, but it once represented the creativity of cooks who honored heritage while welcoming change. Butterbean and ham casserole was built on the simplest of foundations. Cooked butter beans were combined with diced ham, onions, garlic, and a thick sauce made from broth and tomato paste. The mixture was spread into a baking dish, topped with breadcrumbs, and baked until the edges browned and the center thickened. The ham added saltiness and depth, while the beans provided a creamy base that made the dish satisfying on its own. It was the kind of casserole that appeared on weeknight tables when leftover ham from Sunday needed a second life. Families valued it for stretching a small amount of meat into a meal that fed everyone at the table. The flavors were simple but layered, smoky, savory, and grounding. Butterbean and ham casserole was practical cooking at its finest, turning remnants into something that tasted intentional. Red rice and shrimp bake carried the flavors of the Gullah Geechee coast into a single baking dish. Seasoned rice was cooked with crushed tomatoes, onions, garlic, and bell peppers, then mixed with shrimp before being baked until the top crisped. The tomato base turned the rice a deep red, connecting the dish to West African jollof traditions. Shrimp added sweetness and protein, while the baking concentrated the flavors into something bold and aromatic. This casserole appeared at family gatherings and church suppers in coastal communities where seafood was plentiful. It told a story of African foodways preserved through generations on the sea islands. Red rice and shrimp bake has grown rare as coastal traditions fade, but for those who remember it, the dish carried pride, heritage, and the taste of home in every serving. Turkey wing and dressing casserole turned Thanksgiving leftovers into something worth making on purpose. Seasoned turkey wings were baked until tender, then laid over cornbread, dressing made with celery, onions, sage, and broth. The casserole baked together until the dressing absorbed the drippings and the turkey skin crisped at the edges. The flavors were unmistakably holiday, savory, herbal, and comforting. But families didn't wait for November. Turkey wings were affordable year-round, and dressing could be assembled from pantry staples and day-old bread. It became a Sunday supper and potluck favorite, filling the kitchen with the smell of sage and roasted meat. Turkey wing and dressing casserole was a reminder that celebration didn't need a calendar, just a baking dish, good seasoning, and someone willing to make it with care. Hog maw and potato bake required patience and a willingness to cook what others overlooked. Hog maw, the stomach lining of the pig, was cleaned thoroughly, boiled until tender, and sliced into strips. It was layered with seasoned potatoes, onions, and garlic in a deep baking dish with broth, then baked until the potatoes softened and the edges browned. The hog maw had a chewy texture that became tender through long baking, absorbing seasoning and releasing its own subtle richness. Families who prepared it often did so during holidays, treating it as a delicacy that not every kitchen knew how to handle. It was affordable and filling, stretching a single stomach into a meal for the whole table. Hog maw and potato bake was resilience on a plate, a casserole that honored tradition and turned the humble into the remarkable. Chicken gizzard and gravy casserole turned an often dismissed cut into the centerpiece of a warm, filling meal. Gizzards were boiled until tender, sliced, and folded into thick gravy made from drippings, flour, onions, and seasoning. The mixture was poured over rice or biscuit pieces in a baking dish, then baked until the gravy thickened and the top browned. The gizzards had a firm, meaty texture that held up well, giving each bite substance and depth. Families knew gizzards were among the most affordable parts of the chicken and packed with flavor when prepared properly. It was a weekday dinner, quiet and unfussy, but deeply satisfying. Children grew up eating it without complaint because the gravy made everything taste rich. Chicken gizzard and gravy casserole was proof that skill and seasoning mattered more than the cut. Field pea and cornbread bake married two of the most dependable staples in African American kitchens. Cooked field peas, whether Crowder peas, lady peas, or purple hulls, were seasoned with onions, garlic, and smoked meat, then spread into a baking dish. Cornbread batter was poured over the top and baked until the bread rose golden and the peas bubbled beneath. The cornbread absorbed the potlikker, becoming moist and savory on the bottom while staying light on top. It was practical, affordable, and needed nothing else on the plate. Families grew field peas in backyard gardens, dried them for storage, and cooked them year-round. This casserole turned stored peas into something complete. Field pea and cornbread bake was quiet, resourceful cooking, the kind that kept families fed and full through every season. Salt pork and turnip green casserole carried the flavors of the garden and smokehouse into one pan. Turnip greens were simmered with salt pork until tender, then layered into a baking dish with onions and potlikker. Cornbread topping was spread over the greens and baked until golden. The salt pork gave the greens a deep, savory richness, while the cornbread soaked up the broth beneath. Families made it when greens were plentiful and salt pork was the most affordable meat in the pantry. It was a complete meal that needed nothing else, filling plates and stretching across a full table. The dish reflected a time when every ingredient served a purpose and nothing was left behind. Salt pork and turnip green casserole was humble food made with intention, nourishing, practical, and tied to the land. Blackberry cornbread bake was a seasonal casserole that turned foraged fruit into something warm and comforting. Fresh blackberries were tossed with sugar and lemon, then spread into a buttered dish. Cornbread batter was poured over the top and baked until the bread rose golden and the berries bubbled through the edges. The tartness of the fruit cut through the sweetness of the cornmeal, creating a balance that worked as breakfast, dessert, or a side at supper. Children who picked berries along fence rows knew the reward was waiting in the oven. Families made it during summer when wild berries were free and plentiful. Blackberry cornbread bake was never fancy, but it carried the taste of long afternoons and purple-stained fingers, a dish tied to the rhythm of the land and the generosity of what grew wild. Salmon croquette casserole took a beloved breakfast staple and turned it into a baked dish for the whole family. Canned salmon was mixed with eggs, breadcrumbs, onions, and seasoning, then spread into a baking dish. Cream sauce or gravy was poured over the top, and it baked until golden and set. The salmon held its flavor through baking, giving the dish a savory richness that paired well with rice or bread. Canned salmon was affordable and shelf-stable, making it a reliable protein where fresh fish was hard to find. Families served this on weeknights or brought it to church suppers, where it always disappeared quickly. Salmon croquette casserole was resourceful cooking, taking a pantry staple and elevating it into something complete, generous, and worth remembering. Souse meat and rice bake was a casserole born from preservation and thrift. Souse meat, pork parts boiled, seasoned with vinegar and spices, and set into a gelatinous loaf, was chopped and layered with seasoned rice in a baking dish. Broth was poured over the top before baking until the rice absorbed the tangy juices and the edges crisped. The flavor was bold and vinegary, balanced by the mildness of the rice beneath. Families made souse when hogs were butchered, preserving parts that might otherwise go unused. Turning it into a casserole stretched the meat further and gave it new life on the table. It was practical, filling, and reflected the no-waste philosophy of African American kitchens. Souse meat and rice bake has nearly disappeared, but it once stood as proof that preservation and creativity could produce a meal worth savoring. Peach and sweet potato casserole blended two Southern staples into a dish that straddled the line between side and dessert. Sliced sweet potatoes were layered with peaches, brown sugar, butter, and warm spices like cinnamon and nutmeg. It baked until the fruit softened and the syrup thickened into sticky pools at the edges. The sweetness of the peaches brightened the earthiness of the potatoes, creating a combination that worked alongside roasted meat or stood alone. Families made it during holidays and Sunday dinners, filling the kitchen with fragrance that drew everyone to the table early. It used ingredients that were affordable and easy to store, making it accessible in lean times. Peach and sweet potato casserole was comfort at its most generous, sweet, warm, and made to be shared with everyone at the table. Smoked neckbone and cabbage bake paired two affordable ingredients into one deeply flavored dish. Neckbones were simmered until the meat loosened and the rich broth was reserved. Shredded cabbage was layered with pulled meat, onions, and seasoning, then covered with broth and baked until the cabbage turned tender and the edges browned. The smokiness infused every layer, making the dish taste far richer than its cost. It was a weeknight meal that required patience but little money, feeding families who knew how to coax flavor from bones. Cabbage stretched the meal further, adding bulk without extra expense. Smoked neckbone and cabbage bake was the kind of cooking that never appeared in cookbooks, but was passed quietly from kitchen to kitchen, carried by memory and the smell of something good in the oven.
Collard greens with salt pork were the sound of the season. The slow simmer of leaves in a pot of smoky broth the hiss of the lid lifting as steam rolled through the kitchen. These greens were not side dishes, they were symbols. They spoke of survival, of making plenty from what little grew, of gathering around a table that always found a way. The salt pork gave them depth, the kind of flavor that could only come from time. Every leaf softened into silk, absorbing the history of the pot it was cooked in. For many, collard greens were sacred, always washed, trimmed, and prayed over before cooking. The broth at the bottom, known as Potlikker, was so rich it was saved and sopped up with cornbread. On Thanksgiving, the pot stayed on the back burner all day, refilled and shared, a quiet reminder that strength and generosity could grow from even the hardest soil. Ambrosia salad was a bowl of color that felt like sunshine in the middle of winter. Layers of citrus, coconut, cherries, and whipped topping gleamed beneath the lights of holiday tables. It was sweet and cool, the kind of dessert that didn't need baking, just love and a good glass bowl. Each spoonful burst with tang and cream, a little taste of summer in December. For Black families across the South, it represented abundance, proof that celebration could bloom even when times were lean. Children reached for the cherries first, while elders smiled, remembering who first brought the recipe. No two ambrosias were ever the same. Some added pineapple, others marshmallows, but all carried the same joy. It sat proudly beside hams and pies, bright and cheerful like a promise. Today it's rarely seen, but back then, it was as common as laughter. Ambrosia salad was the sweet pause between stories, the dish that reminded everyone that beauty didn't come from money, it came from care. Sweet potato biscuits were soft, golden, and kissed with just enough sweetness to make them feel special. They were the kind of side that showed up in baskets wrapped with cloth, still warm from the oven. The dough was simple, mashed sweet potatoes, flour, and a little butter. But the hands that made them turned them into something almost holy. Sweet potatoes added color and sweetness, the kind that lingered in the air when you opened the oven door. They were often brushed with butter and stacked high beside glazed hams or roasted chicken. These biscuits spoke to the ingenuity of home cooks who stretched ingredients and still made everything taste like comfort. At Christmas, they became a soft reminder of care, food meant to hold you together. They were served to guests as a sign of pride and to children as a sign of love. Even in lean years, someone always found a way to make a batch. The sweetness was a celebration in itself, something earned and shared. Their scent alone could fill a room with warmth, carrying a legacy of home, patience, and heart. Smothered turkey necks were a dish born out of thrift, but remembered for flavor. When whole birds were too expensive, families turned to the necks, rich with bone, sinew, and taste that only slow cooking could release. They were browned first, then smothered in onions and gravy until tender enough to fall apart at the touch of a fork. The gravy thickened slowly, turning glossy and brown, soaking up every drop of history from the pot. It was food meant to stretch and satisfy, each bite filled with patience and care. In kitchens where every scrap counted, this dish was proof that love did not come from abundance, but from what one could do with less. Served over rice or mashed potatoes, it filled the plate with warmth and pride. It was the kind of food that made people hum softly while they ate, grounded by the smell of onions and meat that had been cooking all day. Smothered turkey necks were not just sustenance. They were a quiet declaration of dignity, the ability to make something beautiful from what the world overlooked. Molasses pull candy turned every kitchen into a place of laughter and patience. Made from dark molasses boiled with sugar and butter, it bubbled and hissed like a small storm before turning glossy and thick. Children waited for the moment when it was cool enough to touch but warm enough to stretch. Their hands, dusted in butter, pulled and twisted the sticky ropes under the soft glow of the stove. The candy turned from deep brown to golden as air slipped in, a transformation that felt like magic. It was wrapped in wax paper and tucked into tins for Christmas, gifts made from nothing but time and sweetness. Every piece carried fingerprints, laughter, and the echo of family gathered close. Some burned their fingers, some dropped pieces on the floor, but no one cared. The ritual mattered more than the result. When the jar was full, it meant the holidays had truly begun. These days, candy comes in bags and ribbons come pre-tied. But back then, joy was handmade, and it tasted like molasses and love. Collard greens with smoked ham hocks were the heart of Christmas cooking in countless African American homes. The greens simmered low and slow for hours, their earthy scent filling the kitchen long before dinner was ready. Ham hocks gave them depth, salt, and smoke, the kind of flavor that came only from patience and thrift. Every bite told a story of making something rich from what little you had. The pot itself was a gathering place, stirred by mothers, aunts, and grandmothers who knew the rhythm of seasoning by heart. These greens were not just food, they were a blessing on the table, a wish for good fortune in the coming year. In many families, a pot of greens sat beside cornbread and turkey, representing money, luck, and perseverance. During hard times, ham hocks were often saved or traded for, treated like gold. The aroma of collards became part of Christmas itself, a signal that family was near and that celebration could still be soulful, even when pockets were thin. Cooking them meant remembering those who came before and honoring the work it took to put a meal together. Greens were a sermon in a pot, humble ingredients turned sacred through care. Sweet potato soufflé with marshmallow topping was the shining centerpiece of mid-century holiday tables, where Southern comfort met post-war aspiration. The base was creamy and spiced, whipped until smooth with sugar, milk, and eggs. Then came the marshmallows, soft, white, and toasted golden under the oven's heat. It was a dish that belonged to celebration, a sign that sweetness could still survive hardship. Every forkful was warmth and nostalgia, a blend of the old and the new. Black families embraced it as a statement of joy, a dessert disguised as a side, rich enough to feel luxurious even in modest homes. The sweet potatoes brought earthiness, the marshmallows added playfulness, and together they made something that looked like light itself. The first bite was always followed by a pause, that silent recognition of memory on the tongue. In homes where food carried meaning beyond taste, this soufflé was proof that comfort could be beautiful. Hog's head cheese was the dish that came when the work was hardest and the reward most honest. Made after the winter hog killing, it used every bit of the animal, from cheek to snout, boiled down until the broth turned rich and gelatinous. Families seasoned it with pepper, vinegar, and cloves before pressing it into pans to set. When sliced cold, it shimmered like glass, savory and proud of its thrift. For Black families across the South, it wasn't a delicacy. It was a necessity turned tradition. Each bite told the story of resilience, of making do and making it good. The scent filled smokehouses and kitchens where nothing ever went to waste. It was served on crackers or cornbread, sometimes with mustard, sometimes plain. Children might have turned up their noses, but grown folks knew its worth. It was labor turned nourishment, history preserved in jelly and spice. Today, it's all but vanished, but it once stood as a reminder that from the humblest scraps came feasts fit for kings. Macaroni pie, or Southern baked macaroni, was the soul of comfort in one bubbling pan. Forget the boxed kind. This was real macaroni, dense, creamy, and rich with evaporated milk, eggs, and sharp cheddar cheese. It was made to feed a crowd, baked until golden on top and firm in the center. Every family had their own version, passed down through generations, some adding a dash of mustard or paprika, others folding in onions for flavor. For Christmas, this dish sat proudly next to the ham or turkey, warm enough to melt your worries away. It was a dish of abundance, not because it was expensive, but because it stretched what you had into something that felt whole. Stirring that thick cheese sauce by hand was an act of care, something done with patience and pride. The macaroni pie symbolized celebration, hospitality, and a love of making something perfect out of the ordinary. The sound of a spoon scraping the crusty edges was as comforting as a hymn. Even now, its scent can bring back a lifetime of family gatherings, laughter, and full hearts. Cornbread dressing with gizzards was not a dish made by recipe. It was made by instinct, memory, and the rhythm of a cook's hand. The cornbread came first, baked golden and crumbled fine. The gizzards were boiled until tender, chopped small, and stirred in with onions, celery, broth, and sage. It was not delicate food. It was hearty, deeply seasoned, and made for feeding a crowd. Every aunt, mother, and grandmother had her own version, yet they all tasted like home. This was the soul of Thanksgiving in black kitchens, where the dressing was often the main event, not the bird beside it. It was cooked in iron pans until the edges crisped and the center stayed moist. The aroma of sage and stock filled the house long before dinner was ready. Even today, when boxed mixes have replaced the slow labor of handmade dressing, memories of this dish linger. Because it was never just food, it was an act of care. Baked ham with clove and pineapple rings glittered like celebration itself. It was the proud centerpiece of countless 1970s Christmas tables, shimmering under layers of brown sugar glaze. The ham was studded with whole cloves and crowned with golden rings of pineapple fastened by cherries in the center. Every glaze sizzled under the oven's heat, caramelizing into a sweet, smoky crust that filled the air with comfort. Families sliced it thin for sandwiches the next day or thick for dinner beside greens and macaroni. It wasn't just food. It was performance, love, and pride baked into one dish. Mothers polished Pyrex trays and fathers carved with ceremony, serving slices that glistened like amber. The sweet fruit and salty meat made every bite feel both familiar and fancy. Though store-bought spiral hams have taken its place, none can replace the memory of that golden roast shining in the candlelight. It was more than a meal. It was a symbol of making the most of what you had and turning it into joy. Glazed carrots with molasses and brown sugar were once the crown jewel of Christmas sides. Before canned vegetables and store-bought glazes, these carrots gleamed on every holiday plate. The slow simmer of molasses and butter gave them a caramel richness that coated each bite in sweetness and shine. The brown sugar melted into the glaze, creating something that felt both simple and luxurious. It was the kind of dish that reminded families that even humble roots could taste like gold. Kids loved it because it was candy in disguise, while grown folks loved it because it felt like tradition. These carrots weren't about fancy presentation. They were about love cooked into every spoonful. For many Black families, molasses was more than flavor. It was a memory of survival, a sweetener when sugar was scarce. That made these carrots more than decoration. They were gratitude on a plate. The scent of molasses bubbling in the pan filled homes with warmth, a sign that celebration had begun. Today, the dish has faded, but for those who remember, its sweetness still lingers in memory like a song you never forget. Ham hocks and butterbeans were the meal that made the whole house smell like home. The hocks were smoked and simmered until their marrow melted into the broth, giving it body and heart. Butterbeans soaked up all that smoky richness, turning tender and creamy as they cooked. This dish was not made in a rush. It was made with patience, hours on the stove, and the kind of steady attention that once marked good cooking. Families gathered around that pot, dipping in with spoons to taste before dinner was even served. It was humble food, yes, but it tasted like comfort, thick, salty, and deep. For families who could not afford lavish spreads, this was abundance in a pot. It told the story of endurance, of using what you had and still making it sing. Ham hocks and butterbeans were a reminder that the measure of a meal was not in its cost, but in its care. Cornbread dressing with giblets was the heart of Southern Christmas. Rich, smoky, and deeply seasoned, it carried the flavor of patience and memory. Cornbread crumbled into broth made from giblets, onions, celery, and sage until the texture turned soft and soulful. The oven transformed it into something golden on top and tender beneath. It wasn't fancy stuffing. It was Sunday dinner turned sacred. Every family had their own way, some adding boiled eggs, others sausage or oysters. The taste lingered long after the meal, heavy with spice and comfort. It was more than a side dish. It was a connection to generations who stirred the same bowl. The smell alone, earthy, herbed, and warm, meant Christmas was near. It filled the kitchen with stories told between bites, laughter cutting through the steam. You could taste every hour of care in each serving, every prayer whispered into the pan. Cornbread dressing with giblets wasn't just food, it was belonging on a plate. Candied yams with orange zest and nutmeg were pure Christmas joy baked in a dish. The sweet potatoes glowed like amber under their syrup, each slice soft enough to melt under your fork. Butter, sugar, and spices blended together to make a glaze so rich it felt like celebration itself. The orange zest lifted it all, adding brightness to the deep sweetness, while nutmeg brought warmth that lingered long after the last bite. It was a dessert in disguise, yet a staple side in every holiday meal. Grandmothers made it by instinct, never measuring, just feeling when it was right. The bubbling syrup in the oven was a soundtrack to the season. It was served proudly next to ham, greens, and dressing, a dish that said abundance, even when times were tight. Candied yams were the taste of love, memory, and care baked into one perfect pan. When people talk about soul food, this is what they mean. Sweetness born from struggle, flavor carried through generations, and joy that glows from within. Molasses-glazed ham steak was the kind of dish that filled the house with perfume, sweet, smoky, and dark with caramel. Before full hams became common, families made do with thick slices cooked in a skillet, basting them in brown sugar and molasses until they shone. The glaze clung like velvet, the edges crisping just enough to give each bite a hint of crunch. Served alongside greens or yams, it was a holiday meal that looked like indulgence, but came from thrift. The molasses brought a depth no sugar could match, rich with the echo of the cane fields and the resilience of those who worked them. The ham steak symbolized progress, a small taste of prosperity earned through labor. When it hit the table, it gleamed like something far grander, its sweetness melting into the gravy and the memory of the meal. It was humble, yet it felt like victory.
Which forgotten casserole would you bring back to your table? Drop it in the comments, hit like, and subscribe for more lost recipes worth remembering.